Welcome back to our special series on Ray Huang's masterpiece, 1587, A Year of No Significance. In our last episode, we saw how the majestic Ming Empire began to stall under the weight of its own traditions. But history isn't just about dates. It's about the people who are trapped inside the system. Today, in episode 3, we're going to zoom in on one man who tried to navigate these treacherous waters, Grand Secretary Chang Chü-cheng. So how did one person's choices, or, his failures, end up shaping the destiny of millions? Let's dive right back into the heart of the 16th century Forbidden City. All right, so for 10 whole years, Chang Chü-cheng was, without a doubt, the most powerful man in China. He was the engine of the entire state. And yet, the second he died in 1582, the very system he commanded just turned on his memory. And it did so with a speed and ferocity that is, honestly, truly shocking. Let's get into how something like that could even happen. I mean, just look at how fast everything collapsed. It is staggering. This wasn't some slow decline. It was a political avalanche. In just 2 years, the man who had been the emperor's most trusted teacher and the empire's chief architect was posthumously branded a national villain. So the question is, how on earth did it all unravel so quickly? Well, the whole anti-Chong movement was actually pretty clever. They didn't kick things off with personal attacks. That would have been way too risky. No, instead, his enemies went after his signature policy, the National Land Survey. By questioning if it was fair, they created this whole new political story where anyone who enforced Cheng's rules was a bad guy, and anyone who fought against them was a hero. It's a perfect example of how policy can be turned into a political weapon. And once that first crack appeared, the dam just burst. The attacks went from being about policy debates to a full-blown character assassination. I mean, the accusations got more and more sinister. They started painting this picture of a man who wasn't just a tough reformer, but a corrupt monster who was secretly trying to take over the whole empire. The court was absolutely flooded with these claims. But this wasn't just some abstract political purge. This was also a deeply, deeply personal betrayal. And it was all centered on one man, the young Wanli emperor, who for an entire decade had looked up to Chang Chü-cheng as a teacher, a guide, almost like a father figure. You have to remember, for the first 10 years of his reign, from the time he was a kid into his young adulthood, the Wanli emperor was completely guided by Chang Chü-cheng. Every single major decision, every lesson in how to be a ruler, it all came from this one man. And that's what makes what happened next so utterly devastating. This one story really gets to the heart of the emperor's sense of betrayal. See, Wanli had been taught to live simply, and the state was so broke he sometimes couldn't even pay his own palace staff. So when he hears that his respected, supposedly modestly paid teacher is building a new house, he sends this incredibly generous gift of 1,000 taels of silver, a fortune back then. Now, can you just imagine his shock, his humiliation, when he finds out later that his teacher's mansion actually cost 10 times that amount? He must have felt like a complete fool, and all that respect just curdled into pure resentment. And that resentment, well, it turned into pure, cold rage. In 1584, the emperor sent his guards to Cheng's family estate. And they didn't just take stuff. They sealed the gates from the outside, trapping everyone inside. The result was absolutely horrifying. This wasn't an act of the state carrying out justice. No, this was a brutal, personal act of revenge. So the personal drama here is just intense, right? But to really understand Cheng's story, we need to zoom out a bit and ask a much bigger question. Why did a guy as brilliant and as powerful as Cheng ultimately fail? And why was he so hated by the very bureaucracy he was trying to save? Was this really just about one man's flaws, or was there something much, much bigger going on? This is where Ray Huang, the author of our book, really digs in. He argues that Cheng's tragedy wasn't just personal at all. It was systemic. He's asking this question to get us to his main point. The Ming Dynasty wasn't just being run poorly, it was fundamentally broken. And here it is, his big idea. The Ming Empire had become mathematically unmanageable. So what in the world does that mean? Well, basically, it means the empire was just too big and too complex to be run by its old-school, moralistic rulebook. It didn't have the modern tools it needed, things like flexible commercial law or, accurate financial data. So it was trying to govern a rapidly changing economy using ancient Confucian morality. It's like trying to do advanced calculus with nothing but an abacus. It just doesn't work. Now let's put this in a global context because it's pretty eye-opening. While the Ming Empire was stuck, other parts of the world were moving on. Over in 17th century England, for example, their legal system was evolving to handle a boom in commerce. They were creating new tools like common law and equity. They were building a state that could actually be managed with numbers, with contracts, with finance. China, on the other hand, was doubling down on a system that prized moral harmony above everything else, and it was actively squashing the very commercial and legal tools it needed to survive. So after Chang's fall, the court had a choice to make. Do they continue down this painful path of reform, or do they retreat to the comfort of the old ways? Well, Chang's successor, a guy named Chang Chü-cheng, he really embodied that choice, and his time in power represents a conscious decision to pick harmony over progress, a choice that would end up being fatal. These two guys really represent the two paths the empire could have taken. You had Chang, who was like a shock therapist, trying to force the system to become efficient, even if it was painful. And then you had Shen, who was the ultimate compromiser. His main goal was just to keep everybody happy and keep things stable, even if that meant completely ignoring the huge problems bubbling just under the surface. So what's the first big thing Shen does? He immediately goes after Chang's evaluation law. Now, this was basically a performance review system for officials, and Chang had used it to force them to collect taxes and crack down on crime. Shen argued it was just too harsh, and he convinced the emperor to get rid of it. And just like that, he removed the only real tool the central government had for demanding any kind of efficiency from its massive bureaucracy. And there it is, the empire's tragic choice. The officials, the bureaucrats, they all hated the pressure Chang had put on them. So by getting rid of it, Shen won them over and brought back this feeling of harmony. But it was the harmony of stagnation. The hard, necessary work of reform was thrown out the window in favor of a comfortable slide into total decline.
So what does all this mean? You have the rise of Chang, his spectacular fall, and then the deliberate takedown of all his policies. When you add it all up, it's a tragic turning point and a pretty damning verdict on the entire Ming system.
Here's the final takeaway, the big one. Chang Chü-cheng didn't fail just because he was arrogant or because the emperor turned on him. No, he failed because the system itself was designed to reject the very kind of change he was trying to bring about. Trying to make the Ming bureaucracy efficient was like trying to turn a temple into a factory. Its whole structure, its entire moral foundation, was built to resist that kind of transformation. And so we end with this really powerful and somber conclusion from Rui Huang. The story of Chang Chü-cheng shows us why 1587, a year that seemed so insignificant, was actually the year the empire's fate was sealed. It was a grand record of failure, not just of one man, but of an entire civilization standing at a critical crossroads. And it leaves us with a pretty haunting question, doesn't it? How many of our own systems today are built on strengths that could one day become our own fatal flaws?